good morning. My name is Rebecca Rush, and I'm here with the No Small Change program, which is a nonprofit project, and we are supported as well today by the Pennsylvania Association of Numismatists Foundation for our inaugural Civil War Showcase. We are extremely proud that so many people have come out to provide their displays of things that they have collected along the way that relate to the Civil War that many people would never ever see. These are not in museums, but these are right here and available for viewing. Now, my partner Rick Lank and I are going to roll through a couple basics about the Civil War that we have sort of nicknamed the 10 Tumultuous Years. We call it the 10 Tumultuous Years because so many things happened during that period of time, and thus our name of No Small Change. It's sort of like there were so many changes, and they were huge, that do impact our lives today. One of the first that we start with is actually the Coinage Act of 1857, and at that time it was foreign currency, foreign coinage was circulating throughout the United States. When immigrants would come in from Germany, from England, from Ireland, France, they brought their own coins, and these coins had value because they were numismatically valuable. They were gold, they were silver, they were copper, and therefore merchants were willing to accept them. Although being a merchant must have been probably one of the worst jobs in the world, to be able to denominate these in exchange for that bag of flour or a shirt. However, what happened after 1857, also during this Coinage Act, the United States said we are not going to allow foreign coinage to be acceptable as legal tender. So all of a sudden you've taken away from the United States, people in the United States, their ability technically to be able to go banking with their money from Ireland. One of the results of that, and then further crimping the problems, was the issue of the Civil War emerging. And once the Civil War started to happen, people started to hoard their money. As Wayne Holmgren had told us a little bit about encased postage and the history of that type of coinage, people kept, they would spend down as much of their paper money as they could, but they held on to that coinage because that had intrinsic value. Then, to complicate matters further, after President Lincoln was elected, the South seceded. Many of the states seceded. And when the states of New Orleans, of Louisiana, Georgia, and North Carolina seceded, they said, oh, these U.S. mints are in our borders, we'll take those too. So anything that happened to have been in those mints also then became the treasure, the Confederate treasury, and they, in many cases, just stopped minting. Rick will do a talk a little later on the New Orleans mint and how that changed from the coins that were still there being minted by the Confederacy or by using U.S. coinage for a while. Then the state of Louisiana minted, and thereafter the Confederate States of America. But we had no small change, and thus the issue of, if people remember just a short time ago, think about the COVID period. You go into a store, we need change, we need change. Now today we have cards, we have credit cards, we have a lot of paper money floating around, and we have all different kinds of other mediums that represent cash. But in that particular period of time, if you weren't bartering a chicken, you may have come up with something like a token. And that's an area that Rick and I are particularly fond of because it represents different kinds of marketing, different kinds of advertising, different kinds of once you got onto the battlefield, you have sutler tokens. It's a field of collecting that has many different ramifications and is wonderful for storytelling. But that's only part of the story. And so I would like to ask that Rick takes it on for a little bit about what happened now. We're in 1861, 62. The mints have gone in the South, but President Lincoln gets involved, of course, and says we need a few new mints to replace those old mints that the Confederacy took from us, and a few other things that happened. such as printed money.
Hi folks, I'm Rick. I just wanted to mention one thing before we jump ahead to the mints. Very soon, Bob Evans will be here, who is the chief researcher and curator for the SS Central America, which went down in 1857 in the deep blue sea. Anyway, the reason that's relevant is that it had $1.6 million in gold from California, went down off of Cape Hatteras. And you're going to say, well, okay, so some people lost their lives and a lot of gold went to the bottom of the sea. Problem was that money was supposed to be a reserve for the banking system, which was not regulated at all by the feds. And Wall Street was in bad enough shape as it was. The 1.6 million, which is $50 million today, was lost. And a lot of people, a lot of banks failed. And Billy, Uncle Billy, Sherman, was a banker at the time. And he lost his job permanently. It jettisoned him into a whole different life down in New Orleans, where he met people from the Knights of the Golden Circle, where he encountered a lot of things that many Northerners, he said he was totally ignorant of the Knights of the Golden Circle, but he was in the deep South, just in time for the war to break out. I bring all that up. The importance of that money, that gold at the time, was incalculable. And there are some people, articles I've written that suggested the failure of the banks, the northern banks had more trouble than the southern. And another tariff was passed by Northerners. Morrill was the guy's name. Bottom line is, it taxed the South a lot more heavily than the North to make up for some of the problems that the North was experiencing at the time. And there was this cascade of events that took place that some people think that the Central America going down precipitated a whole lot of different economic problems that ultimately helped to create the war. Now, I don't want to go too far down that path because Bob Evans will be handling that later today. He'll also be here tomorrow. But going back to no small change. This is one of my favorite little posters. Just for you, Dave. People were so astonished at anybody that had change in their pocket. I've read stories where bartenders would say, let's cut a deal. They would take your gold, which they would never, like Cuban gold or Puerto Rican or whatever the gold coin was, they would still accept it, though it was no longer legal tender. Everybody would accept gold and silver. And the problem is, you can't take it to the bank. So you create a whole alternative economy like we have today. Well, when people sell medical marijuana, you can't take the money to the bank. What do? So anyway, there's a whole sub-economy that starts to develop where people exchange money back and forth, but you can't take it to the bank. So anyway, one of the other stories I thought was pretty interesting too, just to be anecdotal. I read in a book called, what was the name? McKinley Cantor was the author. It was about Gettysburg, written at 34. I think it was called Long Remember. Hell of a good book. And he talked about gambling in the camps. And he said, for the first time ever, soldiers were being paid with paper in 1862. They never had paper before. So when they sit down to gamble with each other and somebody pulls out a piece of fractional currency rather than a good old-fashioned hard specie coin, they kind of go, I don't know if I want to accept that bit. And that really was a real true story that came out of camp life in Gettysburg was, do we accept paper money when we gamble? Sooner or later you do. But that was a big shift in 1862.
Ladies and gentlemen, on our first lecture series today, we have Benjamin Franklin.
Oh, okay. I didn't know we were double booked there for a minute, so that's Ben over there.
Again, that's going to be starting.
Oh, I know. It was really great to be over here, just because last year, I don't know if you remember, but the kids zone was right there in the same place. You couldn't even get to us. There were like 100 kids, seriously, and they couldn't record us because there was so much ambient noise. It really was a nightmare. So we begged and pleaded to do a whole big thing as far away from the kids zone as we possibly could, and here we are.
Nothing wrong with children.
No.
Not in my backyard.
Alrighty, so let's see. What other part of the story should we tell, Beck? 62. 62. We're going to jump there. Well, alrighty. Well, yeah, but we'll also talk about just the fact that a lot of people don't realize that the Internal Revenue Service wouldn't exist had it not been for the need to pay for the war, what they used to call the cruel exigencies of war. So that was in 1861 that the first Revenue Act was passed, and they were going to rescind it after the war, but as you guys know, it never went away. It went away for a couple of years, it came back, it went away. But everyone realized, so many people have told me that once a government, I'm not picking on our government, once it establishes some protocol and you hire thousands of people to enforce it, it never goes away. And on that note, and I think you'll all appreciate this, when the Legal Tender Act was passed and we started fiat currency, the American Banknote Company was hired to do all the printing of our new money that was not backed by silver or gold for the first time ever. There were I think it was $50 million in paper greenbacks that were produced in the first years, an enormous amount of paper. And it was printed by the American Banknote Company in the Bronx, which my grandfather had been an engraver for, not in 1862, but he taught me the beauty of the currency and the engraving. And there's some nice examples over there, and I have a book over there about the American Banknote Company that my granddaddy gave to me. And I really fell in love with the currency of the time because of him. Anyway, they're fractional notes, they did that. They did some beautiful railroad notes, which is an example over there. So anyway, the bottom line is, let's see, I'll keep on going down the line here. Okay. Despite the fact that we were printing bazillions of dollars, they had to ship it all down to DC to the Treasury to cut it and to sign it. That was not the job of the American Banknote Company. So a guy named Francis Spinner, who was hired by Lincoln, they had the Treasury Department. Well, he was the treasurer, not the secretary.
Right.
Salmon Chase was the okay.
Secretary.
Bottom line is they hired hundreds of young women to cut the notes and actually would sign them. And at the time, you didn't sign the name of the treasurer. You signed your own name, AKA, you could say Betty Smith for the Treasurer of the United States. And that's a kind of cool thing too, because you can still try to find in genealogy if your great-great-grandmother signed one of those notes. It's kind of cool, and there are people looking into that. So it's something to think about. In 1862, 63, 64, in that order, because we lost 3 mints out of our 5 producing mints to the south, New Orleans being the biggest, is just as big in terms of being prodigious as Philadelphia. Dahlonega, Charlotte, just gold coins. And they closed in 1861, never reopened again. New Orleans did reopen in 1879, but we lost a lot of production. So Abe Lincoln did approve 3 mints, one of which we've never heard of before until we did the research. But Denver, Colorado, which is a big producer now, but it was an assay office for the Comstock Lode, didn't produce a coin until the early 1900s. That's number one. Carson City was authorized by Abe Lincoln, but it was not, they didn't finish building it until about, 1870, I think. It was approved in 1864, 63. And then one oddball in the Dalles, Oregon, they approved a mint in the Dalles, which is close to Portland. It's at the terminus of the Oregon Trail. It's also where the Transcontinental Railroad went through after the war. But no one had ever heard of the little town. But they built the mint. The mint was completed, never produced one coin, because by the time they built it, the Transcontinental Railroad made it unnecessary, and several, Wells Fargo as well, I shouldn't. They used to have to send all the gold from Oregon, from a new strike that was in eastern Oregon, had nothing to do with the California gold rush. But they discovered a lot of gold in 1861, just when the war broke out, thanks to some intrepid guys who were just basically way up in the mountains and found it by accident. And it helped the North a lot. But the Dalles never produced a coin. Lovely little building. They actually credited the building because it's made out of granite and stone. Everything else was made out of wood. There was a big fire that swept through the little town in the 1870s. And they claim, that one building prevented the flames from going down and destroying downtown, the Dalles. Interesting story. And there's a lot more. The guy that was who was going to be the director of the mint, named William Logan, appointed by Abraham Lincoln, died in a shipwreck, not unlike the SS Central America, but it was the brother Jonathan going from San Francisco to Portland. 1865, it also had a lot of San Francisco gold on board. It went down and Logan lost his life. So it was kind of a ill-fated mint. The guy that was going to run it dies. The gold peters out, and today it's a brewery. So the building is still there, and they're making what they now call a different kind of gold, a golden ale. That's true, and I interviewed the people that started, the mint, not the mint, the restaurant, but they had a really hard time through COVID, so I don't even know if they made it. Then there was a big fire in Oregon about a year ago, and they had to shut down again. It's been a real rough haul for them, but the reason I'm bringing it up, we lost 3 mints in the South, and we authorized, through Abe Lincoln, 3 mints, which, Carson City made it through 1890, 91, somewhere there, when the Comstock loot kind of ran out. And anyway, bottom line is, Denver now is a big, powerful mint, but at least it started under the tenure of Abraham Lincoln. Let's see, what else would you find interesting? We talked about it, okay. All right, 1863, I'm really a big fan of a guy his name was Hugh McCulloch, and he was the first comptroller of the currency, again because of Abraham Lincoln. And that occurred in 1863 when Hugh was hired. Hugh was a conservative guy who originally didn't want to do the National Bank Act. He came to town, ironically, to lobby Lincoln to not authorize the National Bank Act, but he came around. He also really liked Abraham Lincoln. He was originally from Maine, but ran a state bank in Indiana, and it was Simon Chase who actually created the legislature that passed with the help of John Sherman, William Sherman's brother, and that enabled the National Bank Act. All the banks that wanted to participate in this new banking system had to buy treasury notes, which helped fund the war, and it also created our first, I'll call it, uniform currency. So a $20 bill that you spend in Maine was worth the same amount as Indiana and the same amount in South Carolina, because before that there was no national banking system. You could have a beautiful note out of, Hagerstown, Maryland, where I'm from, and it says $50, and you try to spend it in Illinois, and someone will say, well, maybe I'll give you 10 cents on the dollar for it. But I don't know you from Adam, and I don't know the Bank of Hagerstown. So it was a very complicated system. I think there were, 8,000 different notes circulating before the war. So anyway, Hugh McCulloch also became the first, he was appointed to be the first Secretary of the Treasury under Lincoln after Chase went to the Supreme Court. I bring all that up to you because Hugh really wanted to get rid of fiat currency after the war. He was somebody else who didn't believe that we should be just printing money forever. But again, that never changed. There were several Supreme Court battles of which Hugh argued to retire $300 million of circulating money, and he lost the argument. And so to this day, we still have money that is not backed by silver or gold. That's old school now. Now we have Bitcoin and everything else, and no one knows where the hell that money comes and goes, thanks to all the technology that exists now. But anyway, that's another story. 1864, I tip my hat to you because that's when In God We Trust came along, right? And I don't mind if you want to say a word about your book. I see it's for sale right over there. I'm happy to move it along, absolutely. 1865 is when, of course, the war is almost over, but more importantly, when Richmond, the Queen City to the south, fell, that's when all the money from all the depository banks and whatever they could scrape up from the Treasury was put on a train or two or three on the Danville line. And so that's one of the topics of the book that we created, which is where did all the Southern dough go? There are all kinds of stories, lots of stories. And most of the money really came out of the Richmond banks. $450,000 of gold on that train from the banks had nothing to do with the Treasury. It went into the War Department for a while and then went back to the banks in paper because Robert E. Lee, who the money was for, quit on April 9th when the train was in Danville. So he could no longer use the money. It made it all the way down to Georgia, by train. And to this day, we're not sure. Anyway, the whole issue of where did all the dough go, which is a very important topic, which we could get into some other days, all about inflation. I just simply want to say that there's tons of counterfeit money printed in the North, flooded the South on purpose, so that inflation went up. It was impossible to wage a war. It was impossible to pay the troops. It was impossible to do anything. So the remaining money that was on that train, some of it was heisted by Confederates that were pretending to be Union guys. They got away with $250,000 in gold. And I found accounts of one of them who was with Vaughn's Cavalry. And I bring it up to you because he said several guys, I'm not naming any names, I'm 70 some odd years old, I was part of the group. They made off with all this dough. One's a very famous cattleman down in Texas. Two guys went to California and they're wealthy. And so a handful of Confederates made off with $250,000, which is about, 25 times that? So we're looking at millions of dollars that a handful of guys managed to get away with. Forget about all these stories about money being at the bottom of Lake Michigan and all that jazz. So anyway, I could tell stories all day. He wants me to wrap it up. I can't blame him. I thank you for your time.